2011 is a year no one living near the Mouse River will forget. It's a year that brought historic flooding, more than 3 feet higher than ever before recorded, and more than 6 feet higher than the flood that most people around Minot considered the flood of record, 1969. But the tale of this rampaging mouse goes way beyond simple numbers. It reaches into homes by the thousands. More than 4,000 in Minot alone were damaged or destroyed. It impacts farms and businesses to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. It stresses and destroys public infrastructure, costing hundreds of millions more. It alters life decisions for hundreds of people deciding whether or not to leave, not only their homes, but the city itself. The tale of this mouse is one of destruction and misery, of resilience and determination, of heart and soul, and of lingering questions. And as our exclusive reporting has uncovered, perhaps the unkindest cut of all is that with different management of the river's dams and reservoirs, Minot would have had a fighting chance of avoiding the flood completely. Over the next hour, we intend to give you a sense of what happened, how it impacted you and your neighbors, and how it should never be allowed to happen again. This is the tale of the mouse. 1969, the year of the big flood in Minot. The year the river was known as the Mouse That Roared. The flood that prompted international agreements to tame the river, known by its French name Souris in Canada and its English translation Mouse in the U.S. New river channels through Minot helped give the city protection to about 5,000 cubic feet per second of water, with 3 extra feet freeboard on the riverbanks. Flood storage was purchased behind the Rafferty and Alameda dams being built near Estevan in southern Saskatchewan. Lake Darling Dam, just 15 miles upstream of Minot, was beefed up to hold more water. When it was all done in the early 1990s, thousands of people living along the Mouse River in the U.S. were told they no longer were in the 100-year floodplain and could drop flood insurance. And since the completion of those dams and a third dam that empties into the Souris, known as the Boundary Dam, there's been no flooding in Minot until 2011. A wet fall, a snowy winter. 2 ingredients for springtime flooding, and the Souris River Basin in Canada had both in spades. And the Canadians knew it, sending out more than $20 million in February to people and governments in Saskatchewan, especially in the southern part of the province, to prepare for flooding. It was also then, in mid-February, that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers took over management of the Lake Darling Dam, and an international agreement kicked in to keep water flow at 5,000 CFS or less through Minot.
A lot of the deep coulees and ravines are full of snow, and it's very early in the season yet.
We knew we were going to have high waters. Certainly not, we didn't expect anything like what we saw, but we knew that we were going to be dealing with it.
Water releases that had been going on all winter from Lake Darling were increased in advance of the expected onslaught of snowmelt runoff from Canada. Early April brought a scare when the snow melted along the Des Lacs River Valley, raising concerns that a decades-old, ill-maintained earthen dike west of Burlington might burst. That dike held, but the region had its first taste of what was to come. Water volumes never before seen in north-central North Dakota. In late May, with runoff from a huge rainstorm in the Des Lacs River Valley thundering toward Burlington, where it would then pour into the Mouse River and head for Minot, the order came to evacuate.
What's the most important thing for you guys to save today?
Our lives, ourselves.
12,000 people in the Mouse River Valley through Ward County fled. Secondary dikes were going to be constructed to save just parts of the city. But then there was a change of course.
I was at home, they called me back in, and they said, you know, we're thinking here we need to make a decision. We may be able to go back to the primary dikes, and that was, you've got to make that choice. You know, you and your team need to make that choice. And we all looked at each other and we said, if we can keep this within the banks, if there's that chance, that's what we want to do.
And that's what they did, with success in Minot. And that's not to say people in rural areas didn't suffer from the high water. They did. An example? Apple Grove residents had to flee the rising water on Memorial Day, and the flood stayed for months. But within the city of Minot, emergency dikes held, and most evacuees returned home.
We were feeling pretty good about it.
But up in Canada, a storm was brewing, with reservoirs filled to the brim with water poised to rush downstream. That's next as Tale of the Mouse continues.
Where's the grass?
It's gone.
Who took it?
The river.
We are not through the flood concern yet.
Minot Mayor Kurt Zimbelman had no idea then how right he was. The worst was yet to come following the scare just after Memorial Day. But a very tense standoff was developing. Corps of Engineers officials kept professing their confidence that Minot's emergency levees were as high as they needed to be.
But at this point, we're comfortable with the level of protection that we have. We ask everybody to be ever vigilant because, we could get a huge storm and we need to watch them.
In other words, the 3 Canadian reservoirs, as well as Lake Darling, were full or nearly so. The ground was saturated, meaning any rain that fell would rush to the bloated reservoirs. And there might be no choice but to throw open the gates to save the dams from catastrophic failure. Still, the Corps of Engineers officials in town tried to offer words of confidence.
The emergency levees can be added to, and we would certainly, we're watching the forecast, and we would take action if that was needed.
The way it changed so quickly on us, that just came out of nowhere for those of us that were working the situation here in Minot. And I don't know if that's negligence on our part or what, but we were meeting regularly with the Corps and with the Weather Service, and they felt they had a handle on it. So we were listening to what we were being told.
What they were hearing really changed on Father's Day weekend. That was when we first saw the water with our own eyes, the water cascading through gates at Rafferty Dam near Estevan. And it was the day Saskatchewan Watershed Authority officials announced a huge rainfall had forced a major increase in the outflow from the 3 Canadian dams. City officials called a Sunday afternoon press conference to say levees were being raised to handle 11,000 CFS in Minot. And the Public Works Director, Alan Walter, tried to sound confident.
So we're looking at this stuff and going at it as prudent as we can and trying to save this city. That's our goal, save this city.
But within hours of that statement, the city was notified the dams in Canada were now spewing much more water than the city's beleaguered dikes could handle. Mayor Zimbelman says there was no choice but to order people out of the river valley.
Now we were working just to give people some time. We had to keep working those dikes so that people had some time to get their belongings out. And so that's where we really put our time. And then when the water came, I can remember that day where it was like, you're going to be at 8,000. Oh, wait a minute. No, it's going to be 11. Okay, we can still do it. We can still do it. And then a few hours later, 14,000 CFS, and you can't, there's no way you can get there anymore.
With the order effective Wednesday night at 10, an estimated 12,000 people in Minot and Ward County and hundreds of others in places like Mouse River Park and Burlington had only hours to pack up and leave.
We started out the day with the plans of sandbagging and building up the dike system around the area, and everyone kind of gave up and we're just moving. Everyone's just moving out now.
And that's when amazing things started to happen. People began showing up to help friends, neighbors, total strangers get the job done.
Got through saying my prayers and stuff like that, and walked out to the front deck of the house and just put down a tote box, I think, on our front porch, and looked out, and there's looked like a 20-foot flatbed trailer on the back end of a pickup truck, pulled right in front of the house, and said, anybody need any help here? Total strangers, hadn't met them in my life. And when they got in, I thanked them. There were 3 gentlemen from southern Manitoba.
Carla Burbage reports on the spirit of community that helped so many people evacuate.
The residents of Teresito Vallejo on the west edge of Minot were the first Minot area homeowners to get the frantic order to get out. Monday, June 20th, people living in the river valley in Minot were told a huge flood was coming and they had to be out of their homes by Wednesday.
I thought, this might be a scare again, and then the more I heard, the more serious it got, and so we started taking everything out.
So I switched over to 13 and KX, and I thought it was a rerun of the news conference, and then all of a sudden they said we were going to get 28,000 to 29,000 CFS, and I go, oh my God.
In this neighborhood of 20-plus homes, everything started happening quickly. By Tuesday, sheriff's deputies were knocking on the doors in Teresito Vallejo, telling them the dike had been breached. The only road into the neighborhood was being swallowed up by the river.
Just loads and loads of stuff going out, trucks coming back in, tons of volunteers and help and sandbags, and it was a pretty crazy time.
It was really frantic. A lot of people just took off.
The short notice meant that people didn't get all of their belongings moved out. Marlowe left some tools and other items behind, but was able to get out his appliances and furniture. He's no stranger to trouble. He was evacuated for 4 months after the train derailment in 2002. After that, he remodeled this house, and now doesn't know if he and his family will live here again.
since 1980. I've been here. My wife's been here since 1966. So, yeah, it is a little tough, you know. But someone's always got it worse, you know. There's a lot of houses, a lot of people affected. I feel sorry for the young couples just starting out and the retired people that are living on, you know, retirement. So, I'm young enough. I can recover.
Brian has lived in Teresito Vallejo just a few months. He and his wife and 3 kids moved in last September. They are soon expecting a 4th child. With the help of family members, he's ripping apart his home and he plans to rebuild.
Just focus on the positive, and you know, I try not to look at the negative too much. So we can't change it. So just press on, rebuild, and make it an adventure.
There's many differences between the 2 families in this story, but there's a strong connection too. Friends, family, and even people they didn't know were there as the evacuation was happening. Flood victims are counting on others to get them through this next process too.
The valley was emptied out 9 hours ahead of the original Wednesday night deadline, thanks to the work of so many nameless heroes. It was during that evacuation we met many memorable people whose lives were in upheaval because of the impending flood. Catherine Ross specialized in finding interesting people and telling their stories. Tonight, some updates.
During a time of crisis, everyone's story is unique and moving in its own way. So as recovery continues, we decided to meet up with some of our most memorable characters to see how they're dealing with what seems like an impossible mess.
Everything is finally coming back to some normalcy.
Normalcy is relative in the Magic City, but it's a big change from that day in mid-July when we first found Kathy Osnes at her parents' Minot home.
To see everything in that much disarray, it's like it doesn't belong to anyone.
It's a home they shared for 44 years and left those decades worth of possessions to the river. Those weeks ago, we wondered, how could the force of water have done this?
It is like the house was picked up, everything in it was agitated like a washer would be, and then set back down.
But after 17 days of gutting, we found Kathy again on the best day of all, the last day of demo.
Completely gutted and with everything gone, it seems maybe half the size of what it was. It's where did they put all those things?
It's been weeks of hard labor, but with help from their church family, even total strangers, what was once molding is now ripped to the studs. What was once filled with water and sludge has become a clean slate. But remember the one miracle in the middle of all this mess? The china cabinet heirlooms left untouched by the river?
And they're like, she cleaned them and put them in there yesterday. Totally untouched. It's amazing.
Almost immediately after they were painstakingly packed away, the wall's ability to hold up against Mother Nature just gave way.
10 minutes after we retrieved everything in the china hutch, the gentleman took the trim off the outside of the china hutches. The first one fell out into the garage. The second one fell down the basement steps the minute it was emptied. And not one thing has broken.
While some things are saved, others completely destroyed. What also hasn't broken yet is Kathy's spirit.
My mother has said that this isn't she and my dad's home anymore. That I'd like to clarify. It will never be the house it was, but with all the little mementos we were able to save, and we'll get those back in there someday, home is where the heart is. It will always be home, just because of the memories that stayed there.
Good news, Kathy's mom is planning to rebuild and to move back in. But if home is where the heart is, we've learned that it's the people that you love, not where you are, that makes all the difference. One growing family taught us that lesson as well, with some big words of wisdom out of a little mouth.
Come upstairs with me.
There are still a lot of steps to climb before this growing family on West Central Avenue can get out of this mess. When we first met the Waynes,
this is Evan, Peyton, and Riley.
They were at the end of one long drive from Portland, but just beginning a new journey, starting over back home in Minot.
We were excited to come home. I mean, once the decision was made, then we were excited to come home.
But now, before the house Brooke grew up in can be home for her boys, it's going to take some blood, sweat, and tears from the ground up.
I feel like we're in limbo. Just want to be in the house.
Although in moments it can feel like the future is crumbling, their goals haven't changed. They came in with the crest, and although the water has receded, the Waynes aren't going anywhere.
I can't say that we haven't asked ourselves a million times over if we made the right decision. We're trying to stay positive. We're trying to look to the future.
Of course, it's a future that Brody already has all planned out. Upstairs, above the chaos of the renovation.
This is my room. This is my room.
We're hopefully optimistic, thinking that we'll be able to stay here and watch our kids' first birthday in January and many more after that.
With the family support that lured them back to the Magic City, this house will again be their home, especially if we keep in mind Brody's original words of wisdom.
And after we move into a new house, they're going to be bigger.
Speaking of bigger, this flood has been a big problem, and not just for the city of Minot. On the border of McHenry and Ward County, the last time we were here, the water was totally over the road. Now it's a really deep washout. Back then, the only way the Johnstons could get home was by tractor, but through their story of adversity, we saw a family coming together.
Oh, you're the lady with the kitties. We hear that a lot.
Some things haven't changed over the course of this long flood season.
This one is River, and this one's Mouse, and this one's Crest.
We first met the Johnstons and heard Rye's creative names for the family's new additions in early June.
This is Camp Johnston.
The Velva Rodeo campgrounds have been home since May 30th, long before the Mouse broke its banks in Minot. And it's been a long road since that Memorial Day weekend.
When we say let's go home, that's where we go, is to camp.
But their fight against this river began before the snow had melted. The back road home is only just now accessible.
We sandbagged the 4th of April. On July 26th, we were still, our insurance agent came out, we were still technically flooded. FEMA still considers us to be technically flooded.
There are signs of a long, active summer around Camp Johnston, but before their kids were getting a little mud on the tires, a seemingly endless spring meant hours of sandbagging and nights of worry.
We'd go tonight's the night. I think it's going to come over tonight.
Finally, the river did leave its banks. The Johnston home took about 6 inches on the main floor. That's not the 7 feet some people saw in Minot's Valley, but consider this. 2 days after pumping the basement nearly empty, it's now again full up with seepage.
That's the biggest frustration, is we're just in limbo.
After all, you can't camp out forever. It got a little crowded at the Johnston compound, so Mouse River and Crest and their mother have found a new home. That's a luxury the Johnstons are looking forward to as well, hoping to move the house to higher ground.
We'll pick this house up and move it out into the hill, and it'll be good again.
While Rye's perspective picked up our spirits about 2 months ago, his parents hope after everything they've seen, their children can look down on this year with a sense of faith and resilience that will carry them far.
I hope that's the lesson they get from this, is you're going to have challenges, but you can rise above them and keep your faith and take care of what needs taken care of first.
Because the water pouring down from Canada was reaching North Dakota much more quickly than expected, by Wednesday, June 22nd at 12:57 p.m., time was up and the civil defense sirens wailed their warning. It was time to get out.
You guys are good? You gonna make it out okay?
We'll be fine.
All right, it's not a drill. Thank you.
Scared of not knowing what's going to happen. You know, you're losing your house, your life. So
I just got off of Blackhawk. I just come over kind of where Highway 83 bypass was. I could see water rushing into the area underneath the CP tracks into that west of Arrowhead area. And the first thing I wanted to do is get back to the EOC and tell those guys, we got to get that culvert closed up because they're going to get flooded. And then I thought to myself, it isn't going to matter. You can plug that, it's just going to fill up another way, within a day or two. And that's when I said, you know what, the water was coming through pretty good, we better sound the sirens. So that's when we did it.
Holy smokes, what do you do? I've never seen this much water.
And the Mouse River flood of 2011 was on, with a vengeance. It started in a few places where emergency levees were slightly lower, mostly on the west side of Minot, including Teresita Vallejo, Odd's Trailer Court, and the Seton Drive area. But it wasn't long before the water found paths over and through dikes all over town. The view from the air certainly was devastating, but it was the slow-motion tours by boat that drove home the message. that had been given Monday by the mayor.
I mean, we're going to become a lake.
The Mouse River surpassed the 1969 crest at about the same time the sirens were sounding on June 22nd. 2 days later, at 11 a.m. on June 24th, the river surged past the previous record of 1,558 feet set in 1881. And it just kept on rising, finally cresting at 1561.72 Saturday night, June 25th. But unlike many floods that hit a crest and quickly recede, this flood had staying power. The level stayed above the former high mark of 1558 right through July 4th, more than 10 days. And it exceeded the 1969 crest level for a half hour short of 15 days. After 58 consecutive days, the Mouse River finally dropped below flood stage of 1549. That was on July 16th, about a week after thousands of people chased away by the water had begun coming back to their flooded homes, finally seeing the catastrophe firsthand.
Was it tough? I mean, Minot is your town, not just because you're the mayor, but I mean, you've been here for so long.
Well, very difficult because you know the people that are down there. They're your friends. I still choke up.
Tale of the Mouse. The Mouse River flood of 2011 continues after this.
There was a time in there where it took me three or 4 days to even go back down.
An emotional Kurt Zimbelman talking about going back into then flooded neighborhoods and the difficulty of seeing what the Mouse River was doing. But eventually, the water moved on and we all had to face reality.
We have a big cleanup to do.
Thousands of times from southern Saskatchewan through central North Dakota and into southern Manitoba, people no doubt had similar reactions as they returned to their flooded homes. It was a difficult time for us here at KX News, too. 5 of the people whose work you see here were hit by the flood. Director Mike Heilman's Burlington home was hit hard. Photojournalist Galen Ness's garage was washed away and his home was hammered by the water. And the 3 anchors of our 171 hours of continuous news coverage, Sean Sitma, Perry Olson, and I, also had substantial flooding. So we thought it might be enlightening to show you what happened when some of us first went back home.
Well, are you ready to do this?
I guess.
Let's go in. Oh man, is that our smoke alarm going off in here? Look at the mold on the ceiling even, look at this. Oh, our beautiful hardwood floor. Look how it's heaved up here. Oh my God, look at the walls in this room. They're all,
The ceiling fan again is at it.
oh, this is unbelievable. Well, you can see definitely see the line here where the water got up to, about 4 feet on the main floor. I can't believe the mud. Look at this. I'd say that this place is, it's toast here. We're just hoping that, you know, we just move on with our lives here. And I don't think it'll be here, but we'll see what happens.
And this is what I've been waiting weeks to see. This is my house, 920. Obviously, some concern points right here. A major crack right along my foundation that leads all the way through and around on my house. And there's my back door that I had to actually kick open just to try to get a peek inside. It's real tough to tell, and I don't have a light in here. I don't have electricity, but you can see where the floor is completely buckled. There is black mold on the walls, but as we walk in, we can see just what the water has done. The water level inside the house here, you can see the line right here where it's at. Everything has just this nasty coat of crusty mud. The walls peeling away, the stairs where we tried to get most of the carpet out, but we're about a half foot off of where we thought the water was going to be. I can only hope and pray that everyone just holds together and that we get through this together.
All right, my wife Melissa and I are here ready to go into the house and give you a tour. Well, we were wondering if we'd be able to not take the ceilings down, but I think we're taking the ceilings down, actually. We had to decide if we were going to try and do this ourselves or if we were going to hire it out. Today we hired it out, and every time I come in here, I realize that was a good decision.
Linoleum.
So maybe that's where the height was at our house. You kind of see, got a little higher, who knows, but definitely that's there. NCIS, open up. Woo!
Stinky. Oh my goodness.
That's not good in here. Calvin's room, and he's got all sorts of mold on his ceiling. This is Natalie's room.
And the birdies made it.
So we have birds. Okay, so that concludes the tour of the Olson house post-flood. We'll bring you back again when this is all done and we fixed it up, whatever that may be and whenever that may be.
Those of us who are intimately involved in this flood recovery know what's happening. The sound of pumps, the sights of piles of rubble, the stench of flood. The plight of thousands of flood victims has touched people around the state, around the nation, even the world. Alicia Huck has that.
Since the Mouse River flood of 2011, the Magic City, once a little unknown speck on the map, is now known not only across the nation, but the world. From local and national news to our live stream on the KX News Facebook page, viewers were glued to their screens. Originally from North Dakota, missionary Bob Schmidt was in Romania and watched the devastation unfold.
We have a lot of friends here, a lot of people who support us. So I was looking all over on the internet trying to find a place to where I could find out what was going on, and I came across the KX live feed, and we actually had that on probably all of our waking moments in my office downstairs and in our apartment, and people would come by and watch it, and my family was watching it, and we were just watching what was going on there.
Bob Schmidt was not the only one viewing from afar. Actor and Minot native Josh DeMille called KXMC all the way from Moscow, Russia, to pledge his support to all the flood-ravaged victims, including his own family.
Josh, where are you calling from?
Moscow.
No kidding.
I've been glued to my computer watching you guys on Ustream. You know, it's difficult to see some of the stuff that's happening there right now. I'll be able to bring some attention to it and raise as much money as I can and bring, let people know that, there's going to be a lot of displaced people in Minot for quite a while, and, whatever help that they can give would be, tremendous.
What amazed most around the world was the small number of evacuees in the shelters. Nearly 12,000 people forced out of their homes, and fewer than 500 moved into the shelters. So where did they all go, many ask? When you live in North Dakota, there's no question of where to go. Friends, families, and even caring strangers took in the droves of evacuees. From Romania to Washington State and back to North Dakota, viewers watched in awe, and KX News Minot Facebook page exploded in popularity. It was the perfect outlet for all to share experiences, frustrations, and support, a one-stop resource of sorts, growing from under 3,000 fans to over 37,000. Daily posts and comments shot from about 100 per day to a high of 15,000 in a day, and the support began to pour in. You probably remember the brothers in Washington State selling lemonade in an effort to raise funds for flood victims. Their family traveled all the way back to North Dakota to present the $700 to flood relief. And then there was the Coca-Cola America is Your Park contest that continues today. A small Cincinnati park was in the running for the $100,000. When they heard about the devastation in our town, they asked their community to vote for Oak Park instead of their own. And we can't forget the Black Eyed Peas and the benefit concert they have in the works. And while the city of Minot works to rebuild, the nation continues to watch on. National coverage may have fizzled, but viewers continue to watch us today from near and far.
Soon after the floodwater receded, the questions began to pile up. When can I get in to clean my house? Will I be able to afford to rebuild? And if so, should I start the work right away? Because there's always a chance there'll be another flood next year. City officials have been working with the Corps of Engineers to retain as much of what's left of the levees in town as possible. And Mayor Zimbelman says he intends to see the city as at least the protection level next spring that was here when the current flood cycle began. The idea is they could be added to as they were this year if needed. But what about a long-term solution? Both Minot and Ward County have requested the State Water Commission begin engineering work on a permanent levee system. Sean Sitma has that.
In its earliest stages, new flood protection plans are moving forward. The City Council approved a motion to have the State Water Commission take on the project, which will be sponsored by the Souris River Joint Board, who sponsored the initial flood plan for the Mouse River.
On the 17th it is, so it's next week, we're going to be going to the State Water Commission
and getting the authorization to have the engineer hired and go forward with the plan.
Minot Public Works Director Alan Walter says the project engineer with the State Water Commission, Tim Fay, wants the pre-final design for the new flood control done by the spring of 2012, which Walter says is moving very quickly for a large-scale project.
If they put enough people on it, that can be done, and as that goes forward, there will be some meetings here in Minot to look at what the engineer is proposing and then get ready for the pre-final design for next spring.
That design, though, will include much more than just the city of Minot.
By Lake Darling or wherever they would start, or on the other side, at least on the other side of Burlington where it affects the housing, and go all the way down probably through Velva, and maybe, depending on how far they take it, but even some of those that are upstream where it goes back into Canada.
The hope is to have a good idea of what flood control will look like in the greater Minot area by next spring, to not only give residents some direction on what they want to do with flooded out homes near the river, but to get the process moving forward to prevent a disaster like this from ever happening again.
But how long would it take to develop and build such a dike system? Another pertinent question. To get some answers, we traveled to the site of the city where the flood of 1997 defined its future, Grand Forks. Here's Jennifer Thorgrimson.
Our normal is different. It's changed. It doesn't mean that you can't have a new normal, but the normal that you knew before the flood is gone.
So all disasters are unique, all recoveries are unique, but there are certain things that are common to disasters, and grief, confusion, immense sense of loss, uncertainty about the future, and those are shared regardless of the disaster.
There are defining characteristics that call for empathetic ties every time a disaster strikes. The Mouse River flood of 2011, the Red River flood of 1997. Ultimately, each disaster carries its own unique personality. But while the world was watching as the events unfolded in Minot, Grand Forks was flooded with memories of decisions they made only 14 years ago.
And it's hard to look at it on the bright side at the stage where you're at, because you're just in the early throes of recovery and trying to figure out what do you do.
We certainly don't want to think of our flood in 1997 as a good thing. We would never want to go through that again. But because of adversity, we had the choice. We could look at this and say, do we want to just try to replace what we've lost, or do we want to try to make ourselves better? I've referred to it as a forced urban renewal project. It wasn't something we wanted to do, but it was the opportunity that came out of a very bad situation that we were able to do.
If Grand Forks had been able to continue to protect their city in the way that they had been, they would have missed the opportunity to remodel City Center Mall downtown and to make improvements to their underground infrastructure.
If I go back to the flood fight in 1996 and 97, it was probably about 40 pages worth of things and steps that we went through. Now we basically have it down to one short list.
We spent about 3 years determining what would be the best way to protect our community, cleaning up, demolishing, rebuilding, before we even turned a shovel full of dirt to build a new flood protection system. We started that in June of 2000. So that was 3 years after our flood. It took us another 7 years to build it. We completed it right at the 10th anniversary of our flood in 2007.
The flood protection system in Grand Forks is a combination of earthen levees and flood walls. Earthen levees were preferred because they can be added to if needed. Flood walls are limited in their structural height, but they take up less room so that existing buildings could stay. While designing the flood walls, engineers added an additional 3 feet to the calculated need. During times of emergency, interlocking planks are inserted to close off gates, making the flood wall complete. Like the series of calculations that went into the height, width, and depth of the flood walls, the distance from the banks of the Red River was also calculated. The 2,200 acres of land that falls between the flood walls and the river makes up the greenway of Grand Forks.
We made a conscious effort to make that greenway an attribute to the community. Obviously, you've got it, and if you don't do something with it, it can become an eyesore.
In total, the flood protection system was a $409 million investment. The funds came from various attributes, including federal funds and grants, $52 million from the state of North Dakota, and an $89 million contribution from the city of Grand Forks.
Flood protection is a really good investment. Our costs for fighting floods today are very, very much less than they were.
The flood protection system Grand Forks engaged in included 12 pump stations, retaining walls, earthen levees, a diversion channel, greenways, and the land to make it all happen.
socially and politically difficult as it is you need to be able to step back from that river to give room for that water to pass.
I could keep the river out, but I couldn't keep the city out. And then you realize you have to do what's the greater good, because people need protection, they need peace of mind, they need solace. And by people fighting to keep what they had would delay the healing and recovery process, which is more important than any one individual. So the town was much more important than Mike Brown.
The Red River had clearly claimed space for itself. 800 homes and 50 businesses were moved or demolished to make room for the Greenway.
Lincoln Park is part of the Greenway. There used to be 380 homes and an elementary school that was here. But this is one of the lowest levels of Grand Forks, and so it was the most heavily damaged. This is an area where the curb is missing, and it looks like there was a driveway here. There actually was, because this is where a house used to be, and this goes all the way along through Lincoln Park this way. You will get angry, you will get sad, you will get jealous, you will get frustrated, you will get exhausted, you will have all of those things happen to you, not necessarily all at the same time. Sometimes it'll feel like it's all at the same time, but it is worth it to pick yourself up and go on.
Grand Forks has just started to feel comfortable behind their flood protection walls. In fact, they only recently put them to the test. 2009 and 2011 were the second and third highest water levels that Grand Forks has seen in history.
And as Minot is already learning, every disaster is different, and it affects communities and individuals differently. And the same is true trying to compare Grand Forks to Minot. They're different situations. But the similarity is this: never have we had the opportunity really to talk to fellow North Dakotans. It's that type of a pride and a spirit that we have here in North Dakota that really allows us to come back from these kinds of things.
Coming up, the conclusion of the tale of the mouse, a conclusion that raises many more questions and suggests some answers to a major one. Could different decision-making by river managers have actually changed the severity of this flood?
The management of the reservoirs is all based on previous data.
We're back here at the corner of 4th Avenue and 7th Street Northwest at the old high water mark from the '69 flood, and now we're ready to add the new high water mark from the flood of 2011. With the help from the city of Minot with an exact GPS reading, this is the exact level for where the water was on June 26 at the peak of the flood. Well, there it is. It's nothing fancy, but a glaring reminder of the devastation that flowed through here for weeks and the height of it at June 26, 2011.
Did you ever see this sign posted along a busy street in West Minot? It raises an interesting question. Was this flood man-made? I collected data on water releases from the 3 Canadian dams that pour water into the Souris River system, added in the flows reported for the Des Lacs River, and came up with an alternate plan for management of the river this year that would have resulted in no flooding in Minot. I said no flooding in Minot. The sign maker seems to be blaming Canada for what happened. My hypothesis places no blame, but rather suggests that strict adherence to internationally agreed upon rules requiring a maximum flow of 5,000 CFS through Minot locked in managers to decisions that ultimately caused or magnified this disaster. First, some explanations of how I arrived at that conclusion. Using sources in the U.S. and Canada, I recorded the daily outflow from Rafferty, Boundary, and Alameda dams. Once the local snow was melted off and run off between those dams and Lake Darling, about 15 miles northwest of Minot, those 3 dams pretty much account for all of the flow through the river. For my proposal, I ignored the Lake Darling Dam, suggesting it simply pass through whatever it receives from Canada and be available for emergencies to handle sudden increases in the water levels. Now, I understand that people involved in this process will accuse me of Monday morning quarterbacking, taking the numbers that actually happened and reworking them to try to change the outcome. And that's exactly what I've done. And why not? After all, any winning football team analyzes its performance to look for mistakes that might be corrected in the future. So consider this an NFL team's film review with an eye on a better outcome next time. Let's look at what happened this year now. A very wet fall was followed by a winter that dumped 2, 3, even 4 times the normal amount of snowfall in southern Saskatchewan. When the snow started melting, inflow to those lakes were hitting 12, 14, even 16,000 CFS through April, while the releases were being stifled to honor that 5,000 CFS rule for Minot. And when you have more water coming into a lake than going out, the level of the lake has to rise. That's what Rafferty, Boundary, and Alameda did, reaching within inches of their full level by early May. That meant that from that time on, any major rainfall in the Souris Basin in Canada would immediately run off into the reservoirs and force an increase in releases. When mid-June brought reports of several inches of rain in southern Saskatchewan, the water rushed into the reservoirs. The gates of the dams had to be opened, and we all know the results. Record flooding that blew away any previous year's river levels or flow figures. We've been told there was no way to avoid this flood, but the proposal you're about to see suggests there certainly was a way to reduce or even eliminate the flood if the rules existed to allow larger releases when reservoir levels are dangerously high. Now, before I get to the numbers, a couple of points. Water managers I've talked with hate the idea of flooding anyone's property, and they further dislike the idea of opening dam gates that cause flooding before a flood actually arrives. The argument is that they'd be castigated for flooding someone if the flood fizzled out. Well, with those thoughts in mind, here's my proposal. It calls for an identical output from the Canadian dams as what actually happened through April 13th, when the actual releases hit 3906. Then, since people who would have been flooded at that 3906 level are in fact now flooded, the scenario keeps the releases at that level instead of dropping them back as was actually done. The proposed releases stay at that 3906 level through May 9th, when actual releases were increased due to a rainstorm. Those reported releases hit 9197 on May 12th. Now, using the same logic, since property that would flood at 9197 has now been flooded by what actually happened, my proposal keeps the releases close to that level. Let's say 8878 CFS, the remainder of the spring, all the way until July. And that's it. Using this scenario, the total volume of water released from the three dams would be almost identical to the actual total of water released. Adding in flows from the Des Lacs River, the total flow through Minot would be over 9,000 CFS. That's a lot of water for more than a month, getting over 10,000 a few times and even exceeding 12,000 on June 1st. The flow would top 10,000 again for a couple of days, June 22nd and 23rd. Those high flows could be handled with emergency levees that city officials say could have been built higher with the right lead time, or by using Lake Darling Dam. Remember that in this scenario, Lake Darling is simply passing through whatever comes in from Canada, so it could be used to store some of the excess water in the highest peak times. To recap, using the actual total releases from Canada, following a different plan to release water from the three dams, and building up emergency levees, Minot could have completely avoided flooding this year. Again, I understand water managers will reject this as 20/20 hindsight, but isn't it reasonable to expect highly educated experts to recognize warning signs and develop plans to head off disaster? North Dakota U.S. Senator Kent Conrad, speaking soon after the crest hit, said this year proves the Corps and Canada need to work out a new set of rules for the river.
There is going to have to be a redoing of the manual that guides how these reservoirs are run, because the facts have changed, and changed really quite dramatically.
Here's hoping there are engineers already poring over the same numbers and working out plans that could be implemented next year to avoid a repeat of the Mouse River flood of 2011. $30,200. To North Dakotans, it's a lot of money, unless your house just had 3 or 4 or 8 or 10 feet of water sitting inside of it for 10 days or 2 weeks. Then the FEMA disaster assistance limit is not nearly enough to recover. The Small Business Administration offers homeowners low-interest loans, but not many can handle 2 mortgages worth 1.5 or 2 times the value of their house. That leaves 2 choices. Commit to staying in your flooded house for at least a dozen years, while the property value and the principal may finally come into balance, or simply pack up and leave.
We're actually moving to Mulvane, Kansas, which is a small town outside Wichita, in 5 days. And I'll go down there, and I don't have anything lined up yet, but I have a place to live and my kids have a place to sleep in a normal atmosphere, and that's the main thing right now.
But what about someone who wants to stay but can't get a loan, even from the SBA? Perry Olson has that.
Nathan Shrum's story is very similar to thousands in the region. It's the American dream: wife and kids, a car in the driveway, a roof over their heads. Then this, a bump in the road, but one Nathan was ready to overcome. Thing is, that bump became more of a pothole. He got bad news when applying for an SBA loan.
We got a call back within 48 hours and we were denied.
They told him to turn back to the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Yes, I called FEMA right after I got off the phone with SBA, and they stated that I already got my max grant that I'm allowed, so where do I turn to?
Good question. Now, don't think Nathan is a big lending risk either. He makes his payments, is very successfully self-employed, and is ready to fix his home. But he can't without cash flow.
The value of my house before pre-flood condition was $210,000. I have $30,200 to fix a house that I have to at least put 100 to 120 in.
He says an appeal to SBA won't work. With his self-employment, he can't prove income changes easily within that time frame.
But 6 months isn't going to help us because tax season isn't until April and I don't have proof of it, any additional income.
So it leaves him where others are, lost, seemingly without the option to build again.
But I don't know where to go.
The state's senators have promised to seek more grant money from the federal government, but that request hasn't been made yet and won't get started until Congress returns from its summer break in September. The state legislature is likely to consider its financial commitment to flood victims when it holds a special session in November. Meanwhile, local officials are left to make plans knowing that the makeup of their community is changing right now as you watch this. Still, Mayor Kurt Zimbelman sees a positive future.
I guess I have been trying to go forward, and there will be time to go back. But right now, my push has been, what can we do to move this city forward? And I think that's where I have to place most of my emphasis. But I have a feeling there are things out there that could have been done differently that would have made this easier on this city and probably other cities along the system. Because people have to know, and they have to know soon, is there going to be a solution for this? And I think there is. I think I've seen things just in recent days that I think we're going to come to a solution. It does take a little more time than people have. It's just unbelievable how many people have come to our aid now, and we're going to need it. I mean, this is one time as mayor, it's like I've said before, it's hard to ask for something for myself, but when I can ask for something for the city, it's not difficult.
How long have you been mayor? 10, 11 years?
9 years.
9 years? So this is your third term?
Third term.
And you're a part-time mayor, correct? That's what Minot has?
Part-time, that's what we have here in Minot, yes. I better say something. My employer, I want to thank him very much because I don't know how many people could take the kind of time I've taken away from my job and been thanked for it. I think we're going to be a better and a nicer city to live in, probably a more beautiful city if that can happen. But I think there's some real opportunities in front of us. This isn't the way you want to go about it, but I think now is the time for us to get together on this and build a city that we're all going to be very proud of, and probably years from now I might not even get to enjoy it like some of you young guys, but there's 10 years from now I think you're going to see a Minot that's going to be completely different than what we see now.
A Minot that's completely different from what we see now. I'm certain the mayor was speaking of the superficial aspects of the town. New parks, new homes to replace flood-damaged houses, perhaps new people attracted to the city by a thriving economy with lush new green spaces. But the people of the city now need answers, leadership, and yes, even something North Dakotans have been known to shun, public assistance, to remain this city's heart and soul. The Grand Forks officials we met told us the transformation to a bustling post-flood city wasn't easy or without pain. Hundreds of homeowners can testify to that. They're feeling the pain right now, swamped by financial troubles that give them precious little choice. Bankruptcy, mortgage default, oversized loans on modest houses. It's easy to see why some we've met have chosen to flee the city and try a new start elsewhere. But we've also met others who've decided to stay on, although most quickly add that they need to see some progress on some of what we've presented tonight: a more sensible water management plan, a levee system that makes the people comfortable, not the water managers, a commitment from their leaders that they'll fight for what's fair to help people who were told they needed no flood insurance find a way to get back on their feet. This Mouse River has delivered a body blow to north central North Dakota. We're down and the count has begun. Will we stay down and crawl back to our corner defeated, or will we stumble to our feet, steel ourselves, and resolve that the final chapter in this fight has us winning in the tail of the mouse?
We're comfortable with the level of protection that we have.
I mean, we're going to become a lake.
When the sirens sounded, our soldiers and airmen were as devastated as you.
They say it's going to go, and I'm not going to have a house. I'm homeless. I have no idea what to do. I need help.
My biggest concern is where we're going to live.
I want to go back home.
Tale of the Mouse was a presentation of KX News.